Carlos Martins, and I am the director of Treasures of the Church. Treasures of the Church is a ministry of evangelization. I travel the world with a large collection of relics of the saints and hold expositions within churches, schools, and prisons. An exposition begins with a teaching, with a presentation that is scriptural, theological, and devotional. After the teaching, the faithful have a chance to view relics of some of their favorite saints in an experience that I call a walk with the saints. Of all the work that I do in evangelization, my work with relics is my favorite work. Why? Because I get to give people an experience of the living God through the relics of his saints.
Hello, and welcome to Stage, Screen, and In Between. I'm Helen. Tonight, we're at a very special event. I'm here with Father Carlos Martins, and he is here with the Treasures of the Church at the Church of St. John. Father, this was such an exciting presentation that you had, a religious happening, but it is a presentation of relics from the saints. Why is this your calling?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on your show, and it's certainly a labor of love. I love the saints, and I love being a priest. I love being Catholic. I love spreading the Catholic faith. Why is this my calling? Simply because God asked me to do it. And how I got into this was a way that was largely mysterious in and of itself. I still don't. I haven't got that part fully figured out. But the short answer is that God wanted me to do this, and He brought relics into my hands 1 year after my conversion from atheism. And in a most uncanny way, the saints find me. I don't go out seeking relics, but they come to me. And I use them then in the ministry of evangelization and healing, that is, Treasures of the Church, and touching the people of God with the witness and the sacred remains of his saints.
Yes. Now, you have over 100 relics here, am I correct?
That is correct.
Yes. Now, how do they come to you? Because it seems like a great challenge. It would be a life's effort to get them all in one place, no?
Sure. Well, originally they came to me just in the most unforeseen events. 1 year after my conversion from atheism, I made a pilgrimage to Rome, and there befriended a student here from America. He was studying in Rome, studying Hebrew and theology. He had a relative in the Vatican with access to relics. In the course of the year, the week that I was there, and I believe he was in his third year of theology, we got to be good friends. And he asked me if I had a devotion to any saints in particular, and so I did. And he just asked me, well, give me that list, and I will have them made up. I'll make the request for you. And so that began a journey that continues to this day. In the years that followed, I became a researcher and historian of relics and began to teach on them. And as I did so, as I was conducting my research, I found people, priests, nuns, monasteries, that were looking for home for relics because either they were passing on or they had more than what they needed for their ministries. And so they gave them to me, and that just continues to this day.
Explain to the people that may not know, what exactly is a saint, and what's the difference between a saint which is blessed and one which is canonized?
Sure. A saint is anyone who lived a life of heroic virtue on earth and is now with God in heaven. Now, a canonized saint is one that is formally recognized by the Church as having lived that heroic virtue. And that's a process that is very long and very exhaustive. The difference between a canonized saint and one who is blessed is that one who is blessed is considered to be among the faithful in heaven. That person is permitted a local veneration. So, for example, when Mother Theresa was beatified,
she was the latest one, right? To be
No, there's
Was
been
Mother
many
Teresa?
since.
Really?
There have been many since.
okay.
But certainly she is recent. She's
Okay.
quite recent. When she was beatified, then that permitted a local veneration. What that means is in India, they could celebrate a mass in her honor. Her relics could go in in altars in India. The Vatican also, because she was an Albanian, permitted the same to occur in Albania. Outside of those two countries, no. You could not have a mass in honor of Mother Teresa in North America. You couldn't put a statue of Mother Teresa in a church in North America because that's universal devotion. When a blessed is canonized a saint, then it's not just a local devotion that is permitted. A universal devotion is mandated by the church. So then it becomes worldwide, and it becomes part of the deposit of faith, because united with the act of canonization is an act of papal infallibility. So it becomes part of the deposit of Catholic faith that this person is now a saint. So now we have that for Mother Teresa. We can celebrate her masses at will. Same with John Paul II and so forth.
So let's tell everybody, what are some of the relics that you do have here? You have a part of the cross, actually, from Jesus that was found by Helen, who was the mother of Constantine, right? You have St. Joseph. You have a part of the veil of the Virgin Mother.
One of the most significant relics that forms part of this ministry is wood from the cross upon which our Lord died, which is always referred to as the true cross. And these are some of the largest remaining fragments of the true cross in the world. Now, I'm often asked, and it is a very good question, how do we know that this is wood from the cross upon which our Lord died? There is a very good answer to that very good question. In approximately the year 315, the Emperor Constantine converted. This was the first time in the history of the Roman Empire that the emperor was a Christian. So what Constantine did was send his mother, St. Helen, to the Holy Land to bring back relics pertaining to the life of our Lord. Now what Helen did was visit the locations where the events of our Lord's Passion occurred. But Helen was shown a vision. She was given a revelation in which it was revealed to her where she would find the wood of the true cross. And they found many, many crosses. They didn't find just one cross. And they found many pieces of wood and timber in addition. So the question now becomes, which of these pieces of wood, if any, is wood from the cross upon which our Lord died? Helen was very clever. She brought in a woman who was very sick and very close to death, and she had her lay down on each cross and each piece of wood one by one. Well, there was one cross on which she lay down when she was healed instantly. And Helen said, "That's our cross." This is wood from that cross brought by Helen back to Rome.
Part of this ministry is one of the largest certified pieces of the true cross that is left in the world, a piece of the veil of Our Lady. As you mentioned, there are relics of all the saintly apostles here, and a lot of the heavy hitters that most people would know: St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Ignatius Loyola, John Paul II. So a mix of the old, a mix of the new, saints that people identify with because they know their stories, they've heard about them, or they have a patronage that is so sought after by people. For example, St. Peregrine, the cancer saint. Cancer is so prevalent that his...
St. Dymphna is mental health, right?
I was just going to say that. Saint Dymphna is one that people appreciate very much, just because of the prevalence of mental illness, and everybody knows somebody who's got mental illness. And
my grammar school that I went to was St. Joan of Arc, and guess what the name of my first grade teacher was?
Joan?
No. Sister Maria Goretti.
Oh, Sister Maria Goretti. I just told her story.
Yeah, she's a saint who was 11 years old, right, when she became a saint. Correct. So briefly tell the audience her story, because honestly, I did not know her story until tonight.
Okay.
Because probably in first grade, it might have been too frightening to tell the children.
Sure.
And as time passed, you receive your confirmation, and you pick your saint, and you know about them. Sure. And honestly, unless you just reminded me, I didn't know.
Sure.
So tell everybody about Saint Maria Goretti.
Sure. Well, Saint Maria Goretti was a young girl born in Italy to a poor family, and from the beginning of her life, it was marked with hardship. They struggled daily to make ends meet. And so her father, seeking out work, hired himself out to a local landowner. But he worked himself so hard, working 16, 18 hours a day, that when a mosquito with malaria bit him, he succumbed to malaria 10 days later. So that changed the dynamics of the family in the sense that Maria's mother then became responsible for putting bread on the table. She had to work the farms. Maria, at her young age, had to take over her mother's role in the family, doing the cooking, the cleaning, and the raising of her 5 brothers and sisters. Maria, at that age, at that stage of her life, really had to become an adult overnight. She became very serious, but became very diligent about assisting her mother with relieving the burden of the domestic duties from her. And Maria was in charge of everything. She was the first to rise. She was the last to go to bed. She would discipline her brothers and sisters. She had one brother who was older than her. It was her job to discipline him as well, and he would listen. And it's not to say that any of the kids were bad, but they were kids. Yeah. And they just... Maria was the kid who stopped being a kid out of necessity. But what's tragic is the fact that her next door neighbor, who lived in the same dwelling as they did. So, pardon me, the landowner put the Goretti family and the Serenelli family in the same dwelling, and it was divided by a common kitchen. The Serenellis, it was old man Serenelli and his son Alessandro. There was just the two of them. They had no woman in their lives because Serenelli's wife had died. And so the landowner had thought, you know what, the Gorettis need extra men. The Serenellis need a woman, so they put them together. When Maria's father died, then he wasn't there to defend his little girl. When Alessandro, the 20-year-old goof, started to make sexual advances towards her, she had no one to protect her. And she didn't dare tell her mother, because if she did so, then her mother would sever the relationship between them and the Serenellis by moving the family away. And the family had nowhere to go. So if it came to that, the family may not survive. So what happened is one day Alessandro approached Maria with a sharpened file, and I guess the easiest way to imagine what that object would be like a flathead screwdriver. He came to Maria and he demanded that she surrender her virginity to him. He dragged her into the house. She had been sitting on the front stoop, so he was alone with her, and there was no one able to defend her. And he made that demand of her and threatened her with murder. And she refused. And so he threw himself at her. He managed to tear her dress. And you know what? Really, nobody knows how this happened, but that little 11-year-old physically stopped him from doing what he wanted to do. In his anger, he took that file and he stabbed her 9 times. And he stabbed her with such a force, the file went in her body on one side and came out the other for 6 of the 9 wounds. The 3 that didn't, they didn't because he hit her spine. And he hit her spine so hard that he bent that file. Maria fell onto the floor unconscious. He thought she was dead, but she was only unconscious. He went next door and he locked himself inside his room. Maria then regained consciousness, and he heard that. He heard her dragging herself towards the door. he came back and he stabbed her 5 more times. Maria then developed an infection known as peritonitis, the same infection you would get if your appendix burst. She was taken to the hospital, which was a great distance away, but by the time she got there, the journey from her house to the hospital, although it was about 9-10 miles away, so the distance wasn't that great in terms of how we view distance today. But back then, that took over 6 hours to make that trek. So by the time she got there, she was dying. Yeah. Her dying words were, "I forgive Alessandro Serenelli. I want him with me in heaven forever."
Yeah. So her greatest gift to us is forgiveness. To teach us forgiveness. If she could forgive him, and then later on, she appeared to him in prison and gave him lilies, right? 14 lilies.
She made an act of forgiveness to him post-mortem, after her death in prison, and that action completely changed that man. Yeah. I mean, overnight, he went from being a monster.
Yeah, and from being in denial about the whole thing.
From being in denial, from being just arrogant, mean, selfish, into being an absolute pussycat. And so that began a journey of life for him, and now there are people talking about beginning a cause of canonization for him, because there are reports of healings that he has done to people who have invoked his intercession.
Yes. And that brings me to this. These relics, people have actually stood in the presence of the relics and have had healings and miracles. Is that true?
Oh, many, yes. I mean, the ministry is one of healing and evangelization, and that's why I do this. I don't have a traveling museum. Yeah. If that's all this was, I would have abandoned it years ago, because I would have been more useful to the church as a parish priest somewhere.
But it is important that you are traveling, that you go to where the need is, or where the interest is, or where you might feel a calling that the need is there, right?
Sure. And what the need is, what occurs in the ministry, is God revealing himself through the sacred remains of his saints and through the witness of their stories. And that revelation occurs in healing and in conversion of heart. So that's the magic, if you will. It isn't the fact that there are a bunch of old things here, as special as they are and as precious as they are in and of themselves, but the fact that God ratifies them by altering the course of nature for people. Cancers are taken away. People have their stroke effects removed. Osteoporosis is gone. There have been many, many, many hundreds of miracles reported to this ministry. I have boxes and boxes of testimonies at home.
Yes. And it gives people hope too. I mean, you go to schools, you not only communities, you also go to prisons. So let me ask you, what is the response that you get from some of the prisoners?
Oh, it's always a magnificent response. In fact, the greatest of the exposition, the greatest effect is always in the prisons, because those men and women have nothing, right? They have no hope in their lives other than God. And if they don't have God, they have no hope at all. So this gives them a light. This gives them a testimony of something that they're not hearing about in any other way. For a great many of them, they come because this is, a break from the mundane. They may not have any religious faith at all, but this comes in under a kind of auspices of a religious, not really, but a historical exhibit.
It is historical.
And so
it is historical. These are people that walk the earth and have a story that they lived.
Sure. And so that, for many of the inmates, gives them a kind of cover that they're willing to walk in under. Okay, well, this is a historical event. I'll go and attend it. So that's how I'll advertise it. And then I hit them with a message.
It's very interesting, too, when you hear all the stories of the different lives. And something I want to ask you, Father, a lot of the lives are a little gruesome. Daniel, in the lion's den, and a little violent. How can we become a saint today?
Well, it's true that it's true that the stories of many of the saints are graphic, but our faith is graphic, right? The Son of God was crucified. So for us as his followers, we become a saint by obeying his will. And if his will sends us into an act of witness that is gruesome, that's bloody, it doesn't have to be, but if that's where he calls us to, he will give us the grace to survive that. Not necessarily in this life we won't survive it, but we'll survive in heaven. And Maria Goretti is a great testimony to that, along with other saints, St. Thomas More and so forth. These are heroes that put love of God above even death. And that's the price and cost of discipleship. That's what it is. So our faith has to be an all-consuming thing, whereby we are with God 100%. God cannot be just one good among the many goods in our lives. He has to be the sole good. And everything that we do as Christians has to be done in God and in our faith. In so doing, we allow God to transform us into his witnesses.
Now, Father, if someone wants to have you visit with your relics, how do they go about it?
Well, they visit my website, treasuresofthechurch.com. There is a tab on the website whereby they can make a request for an exposition. I certainly do ask people, though, to have the permission of your pastor before making a request, because we do have a protocol in the church. The church pastor is in charge of the parish. He is the one to grant the permission. But you can certainly facilitate it by talking to your pastor, proposing this, seeking that permission, and then make that request.
Yes, and we'd like to thank Father Reichlen, right, for having us here at the Church of St. John. It was a lovely turnout tonight. And you mentioned something about being almost called, developing a friendship possibly by one of the saints tonight who is here that you have a relic of. Tell us something about that.
Sure. Well, from the beginning, people have testified that one saint in particular has reached out and spoken to them at these expositions. And so what I do in my presentation is I train people on how to identify their saint. And so when people are released to go and undergo what I call the walk with the saints, they are trained in order to go and seek out that communication. And when people find that, it's a very, very powerful thing for them, a very emotional thing, but it touches them very deeply. It sometimes is a saint to whom they've already been devoted their whole lives, but oftentimes it's a saint they've never even heard of before. But it becomes very, very overwhelming for most people.
And also, you're invited to bring a picture or something of a person that you love that you want the saint to intercede on their behalf, and they might not be able to be present. Sure. So what is it that you would bring?
Oh, gosh. I certainly encourage people to bring photographs of their family members that they can touch to the relics as a means of intercession. If you don't have a photograph, if you have a picture on your phone, you can touch your phone. Because at heart, what we're doing is we're just making that request. We're exercising our relationship with the saints. So if you don't have an actual picture, it really doesn't matter, as long as that person is in your heart. But I also encourage people to bring their items of devotion, rosaries, holy cards, medals, and so forth, to touch to the reliquaries. They become relics themselves when they do so. So then those objects can be touched to the sick and bring about healing. We hear that same thing happening in Acts chapter 19. When St. Paul would walk down the street, they would lay cloths and handkerchiefs on him, and it says that they would lay those items on the sick, and two things would occur. The evil spirits would depart from them, and healing would be manifested in them. Their sicknesses would leave.
That's a wonderful thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Father. And I hope a lot of people have you come and visit, because it's a blessing.
Thank you very much. And more information, again, is at treasuresofthechurch.com.
It's such a beautiful experience to just be here together with friends, the friends that we don't see but that are with us all the time, the communion of the saints. There's so many amazing witnesses to our faith here, and just being able to experience it and touch them and read their stories just brings it closer to the fact that, they're here with us all the time. My father-in-law's cousin in Sardinia is a blessed in the church. Her name is Gabriella, and she died for the cause of Christian unity. She gave her life, and she was beatified by John Paul II in 1985, I believe. She was actually incorruptible when they exhumed her. So, yeah, it's exciting.
I'm here with the pastor of the Church of St. John, Father Reichlen, and I am asking him if it's okay to call the saints here the superstars of the church, other than Jesus Christ.
The saints of our great intercessors. The saints are our patrons in all things, to be holy, to be among them, to be with them. So this is a tremendous experience to be close to them through their intercession, to their these relics here that are present, that we're just reminded of our dignity, our calling to be saints, and to be among them according to whatever state in life we live. So they're certainly the superstars of our faith. We can model our lives upon them and pray for their intercession to be like them. Thank you so much for listening today, for watching this program. Thank you to Father Martins for being here at the Church of St. John for this wonderful, wonderful event of celebrating the saints, the treasures of the church. Thank you again.